Welcome to another video in the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Right now, we're working on building our first section of work, which is the basic register. In this video, we're actually going to create that sales register screen. But before we get started, I want to let you know that this video has been sponsored by the PVS Studio team. They promote static code analysis methodology in general, and their PVS Studio tools in particular. Static code analyzers allow you to find bugs in source code on the development side. This helps to reduce the price of fixing them. So the PVS Studio performs code analysis and issues warnings on the fragments of code with a high probability of having bugs and potential vulnerabilities in them. The tool supports C, C++, C#, and Java. It can also work with Visual C++, GCC, Clang compilers, and some embedded systems. The analyzer works on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. PVS Studio can both be used as a standalone tool and can be integrated with Visual Studio, IntelliJ, IDEA, SoniCube, etc. In the video description below, you can find links to the PVS Studio website and the article Technologies Used in the PVS Studio Code Analyzer for Finding Bugs and Potential Vulnerabilities. So if that sounds like something that would be interesting to you, please check them out. All right, and definitely thank them for being a sponsor of this video. Okay, so let's get started. Now, in the last video, I said the next video is going to be about the event management system, and that's still coming. That's not this video. Instead, this video is going to be about creating that sales screen. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being my schedule, but another being the fact that I do want to have something to capture the event, something to happen next after we log in. So the idea is once the user logs in, they'll go to the sales screen where they can start taking things from the inventory and putting them in their cart and then creating a sale. So that register page that's probably be run by an employee at first, or at least with this tool, will be what they go to mainly as their primary thing to do in this application, specifically in this unit of work that we're working on. Okay, so we're going to create that screen today. Now we already have this designed back when we designed our application in the very beginning. There's design videos you can see. Just in case you're wondering, this course does have a playlist. So if you ever get confused as to which ones you've watched, which ones you haven't, you can go to that playlist and see them in order from start to finish. So if you want to catch up on something or dive deeper into a piece or go back to something we've done before, that's the place to go. Okay, so let's switch over now to our Visual Studio. And here we have our 5 solutions. And I'm going to, well, first of all, again, I don't do this very often. I usually forget. But again, even though I'm on a single person environment, I do want to do that fetch to make sure there's no incoming commits. Now, fetch, remember, just finds out which ones are there. It doesn't actually merge those changes in. I do a fetch just to don't cause any problems where I want to say, oh, I want to do something first before I do that or pull that commit. So that's what I do. That's my personal preference. So now we can get started and go to our desktop UI. We're going to add a new view and a new view model. Let's start with the view model. So right click, add, class, and we're going to call this sales view model. I get public, and we're going to inherit from screen, which we have to control dot here and to add the using caliburn.micro namespace. Okay, so now that's our sales view model. Now we can add our view. And just to, in case you're wondering, we're using user controls. So I want to kind of point that out. The shell view is a window, but that's what everything kind of lives inside. So since it lives inside of the shell view, they're not windows on their own typically. So they're more user controls they put inside that window. So we call them forms, but they're really user controls. So add user control, and we'll call this sales view. Make sure those names match up. So sales, it's plural, view model matches up with sales view. And then we'll get the automatic wiring that we are looking for. Now let's see what setting we already have in the login view we can possibly take from there and just copy and paste over. So that's some of the basics. We have our background is white, font size is 24, and we have a design height and width that we will leave alone. So let's copy those two things though, and we'll come over to our sales view and paste those in. That just gives us a starting point to work from. Now let's shrink down this view a little bit. It's a little small, so let's put it at 80%. Come on. And it's not letting me choose it automatically. Interesting. Well, we're going to shrink it this way. So we'll shrink it, and then we'll shrink it to fit selection, which is even smaller. Excellent. All right, there we go. And rows have width. I'm sorry, height. There we go. Where I set it to auto. So that makes one row. And we'll put a few rows in here. We have the list views, which are probably going to span a couple of rows. And we have the add to cart button with the quantity that kind of goes in the middle. So we're going to have at least 3 rows there, and then we'll have 3 more for the prices underneath. So that's 6. We'll have a buy button. So we're going to have at least that many rows, and the last one, of course, is going to be the star. Now, just to kind of refresh, the auto takes up all the room it needs. So if it doesn't need any room, it won't take up any room. So right now, on the left over here, you notice it's kind of hard to see. This little arrow right here is kind of layered on top of each other. That's because all of these rows fit in that little blue line you can't really see. This row right here is the rest of the white space, because it takes up star, which means as much space as you'll give me. Now, if you had 2 star columns, they'll split their space between the 2. And you can play around with how you do star columns. But typically what I do is just have auto for everything and then star for that last one. Now let's do our column definitions. Grid.column definitions. And column definitions have the width. And again, we're going to do auto. Same principle here. And we need at least 3. I'm thinking a little more than that, but let's start with 3, and I'll do 1 extra. So 4 and the star column. Now, you can always add more. That's kind of the beauty of it. And really, since these are auto, if you have extras, it doesn't hurt anything. So I potentially could add 20 rows and 20 columns and it wouldn't hurt anything. It's not clean though. I prefer to have just what I need, but you can have extra if you need it. Okay, so there's our row definitions, column definitions. We'll shrink those back down. No reason to have them open. And that's in the grid. The grid is the only thing on the user control. Everything should be underneath the grid, or inside of it, I guess you could say. Okay, so one of the things that people often kind of don't like about WPF is the lack of drag and drop. And you can drag and drop if you want. It's not the way WPF was designed, and it doesn't take advantage of the power of WPF, but you in theory could drag and drop. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a list box over to my XAML control. Notice it kind of just puts it right there with no parameters, which I could just type list box out. But that kind of shows you what you can do if you really want to have drag and drop. You can drag them out of your XAML or your designer view. Minimum width of 50. So you have something here. Notice this is smaller than what we're expecting just because this right here is 100%. So that's kind of the height we've got right now. We'll probably make it larger than that. Let's make it actually 100 for the width. Oh, I've got the insert. I had my caps or my num lock off, that's why. So 100 wide, and let's make it 200 tall. Let's make it 150. Looks about right. Now we do have padding on this overall control, so it's not going to be right up against the edge like it looks like, but and then in between we'll have column 1. And inside that, we're going to have to put a couple of things. I'm going to want a text box that has the quantity, which I'm going to want a label above it and a text box that says, actually the quantity. I'm going to want a button that says add to cart, and then probably a little space or something, then a button that says remove from cart. So you can select something on the left and then say, here's something I want, and then say add to cart. Or you can select something on the right and say remove from cart. Actually, it's a value, I believe. Or you just put it in between. Yep, there we go. They're different for all these different controls. So sometimes you just try it out. Some have content, some have value, some have... this might be text. Yep, it's text. Okay. So let's do that. We don't need a full thing. We can just do that. So this slash at the end means it's self-closing. There's no need for a closing tag. So this is opening and closing, whereas this is called self-closing because it has the slash at the end, meaning it doesn't have that pair because there's no need. There's nothing in between, therefore we just put the slash at the end. So this text block is going to say quantity. And then what we'll do is after the text block, the stack panel, by the way, what it allows us to do is stack multiple things on top of each other. And in this case, on column 1, row 0. So that's the first thing we'll do. And then next what we'll do is we'll have our text box. We'll give it a name. And the name is going to be quantity sounds good. Or maybe item quantity is probably better. Item quantity is good. And let's have a minimum width on this. And let's say the minimum width is going to be 100. There we go. So there's our text box right there. And then after that, we'll have a button with a name of add to cart. And we're going to have, this one has content. And this content's going to be add to cart. Like so. And then after that, we're going to have, I'm not putting any spacing yet. I'm just going to get it in first and then we'll worry about spacing. So a button with a, nope. Name is remove from cart. And the content is remove from cart. Like so. So there's our 4 items we need to add. Let's take this row span off. We don't need this anymore. So now it's all, this is row 0. Although I'm going to bump down a row and say it's actually row 1, because I want to put a text box above each of these. So we'll do the same thing here. And then we'll put a text block that just has a text that says, let's call it just items is fine. And then we'll do the same thing, which we need to specify, just be clear here. Grid.row equals 0. Grid.column equals 0. And then here, we'll column 2, row 0, and this is the cart. So we've kind of labeled, okay, these are the items, this is the shopping cart. Now, as you can see, and let's unpin this, we have a little more space. As you can see, it's kind of squished. Well, first of all, we have more room to the right, but that's okay, because as you add items, these will get larger. That's one of the benefits of DPF, is that unlike WinForms, we're not locked into whatever width we give it, as long as you don't say this is the width. So in my case, I've said the min width and the mid height. That way it can grow. So if I have something that's really long, that's going to get wider to accommodate. So it's going to handle this adjustment as needed on my form for me automatically, kind of like a web page does. But right now, everything's squished together. So let's fix that. So margin, I'm going to say just the bottom. So left, top, right, bottom. That gives a little bit of space. That's good. And then after the add to cart, let's do the same thing. Only this time, I'm going to give quite a bit of space. Let's say 30. Just to kind of have some separation there visibly, that add to cart goes with this, and remove from cart is separate. Now this button right here especially is a little ugly. It's kind of crunched up against the edge. So let's fix that with some padding. And let's just say, let's start with 5 everywhere. And that looks a little better, but now it's not matching the add to cart button. So let's fix the add to cart button. There we go. So now our buttons look a little better. Okay, so that's now our form. We have our items, we have a cart, we have quantity, we have the add and remove from cart. Now what we need is down here, we wanted to have a list of the subtotal, the total with tax, or the tax, and then the total with a buy button. Okay, so we were thinking we're just going to stack it right underneath the cart, and that will probably work. But if we have any kind of problems where you say, you know what, let's use our screen real estate better, we can probably put it left to right underneath this whole section if you wanted to. But for right now, we're going to stack it underneath column 2. So underneath column 2, we're going to go to row 2 and have let's just do a text block. We'll give it a name though. We don't name things unless we're going to assign values to them. So this text block is going to be the subtotal. And for a placeholder text, we're going to put the 0/00. Okay, and we need to place it somewhere. And right now it's in the upper left-hand corner. That's not right. Notice it's up there. If you ever see this kind of happening, that's because you didn't give it a row and column. So grid.row is 2. And grid.column is 2. There we go. And we have the option here of how you want to center it. If you want to center it right justified. So text alignment, we can say right, and that moves it over to the right. And that usually looks a little more like what you'd expect from a field that has a subtotal. But right now it's not telling us that that's the subtotal, it's just saying $0. So let's fix that by actually putting a text block that says subtotal, colon, and a space. But to do that on one line, what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a stack panel. So stack panel, orientation is horizontal. I specify either way, just so I'm doubly sure I'm getting what I need. They want to give it the same grid, row, and column that we're going to give this. So let's paste that in. That fixes the formatting issue there. And that should be it, I believe. And then we'll cut and paste the text block into it. And then we'll do one more text block. And this one, we're not going to give it a name. And the text is just subtotal. Okay, there we go. There's our subtotal and the amount. And what we can do now is we can copy this and paste it 2 more times. That's going to yell at us about the subtotal name, the tax, and total. And then just change the text blocks as well. And notice we're stacked on top of each other, not a big deal. That just means we had changed the rows to be 3 and 4. Now the only problem is, well, there's a couple problems here, but one of the problems is that we don't have a spacing in between. The other problem is we've got an alignment issue now. We said text align is right, but it's not text align to the right. I think the reason why is because stack panel just says stack them right next to each other. So it is right aligned, but it's not taking up the whole space. So what we can do, I believe a fix to be had. Let's do it in this one, which is most obvious. Let's change it to dock panel and see what we get. Look at that. So a dock panel allows us to change to have one be left aligned, one be right aligned, and it lines up properly. So now it looks like they're all in line, which they should be. So let's do that for all of these. Now dock panel So what we can do is a couple of things. We could have a larger width here if we wanted to, and instead of width, I don't like doing that. Instead, we can just add some padding here, or a margin actually, and just say left, top, right, bottom. And now we have spacing for all of them because the longest one now has that margin. We don't have to add it for all of them, just for the longest one. And so now our cart is actually a little wider because of it. Now here's the deal. Once we have items moved over to the cart, this cart will probably get even wider, and then that one won't even be a problem. But this way, it's not a problem even when we start. Okay? So that way, no matter what it is, we'll still have enough room to have a little bit of space in between these two. So right now, I think that's looking pretty good. I think we've got a good look. It's going to grow as we put real items in, but it kind of lines up the way I'm thinking I want it to line up. The last thing we need to do is we need to add a button down here. So let's add a button. And we give it a name. And that name is going to be check out probably. That's the buy button essentially. And we're going to give a grid.row, and the row is 5. And a grid.column, the column is 2. And we need to give it a content, and that content is check out. And I think that's all we need. Oh, we're gonna need some margin and stuff here. So let's take care of that. So let's start with some margin, and let's put a little bit of space above it for now. So left, let's do top is 20, right and bottom. And now we've got that. And we also, on our other buttons, we did a padding of 5. Let's mimic that. So we have that same look as the other buttons. And now we have our checkout button. So there's our form designed the way you want it to, I think. We don't have any kind of banner up here saying what it is. I think we should probably add that. Now, the problem here is we have to add another row above everything in order to put that in. There is the option here. Let's see if we can get this to work. It always depends on if you can get your cursor to work in the right spot. What I'm going to do is I can come back up here. I can either put it in column 0 if I wanted to, or maybe I'll just label it header. And let's put a text block. And we don't need to give it a name, but our text is going to be the sales page. Let's call it that for now. I'm good with that. That's a sales page. We're going to make the font size a lot larger. So let's make the font size, let's try 48 and see what happens. That looks about right. Now, it skewed everything over because of the fact that it's just on column 0. We can change that by saying grid.row is 0. Always good to specify. Grid.column is 0, but then grid.column span is, let's do 3. That way, if I need more space, it'll give it to me. And let's change height from 80 to auto. All right. If you put your cursor after the end of the grid, it takes away all the lines. And you can kind of look at it a little more fresh. And I think that looks better. I think it looks a little more like what we're looking for. Again, it's off the bottom, but that's just because of our design height. So if we put this at 650, we could see more. I think 550 is probably good enough. And yes, it's crunched over the left, but that shouldn't be a problem because of the main page having that spacing. But if it is a problem, we can come back and fix that if we want to. But I think that we're good for now. All right, now we're not going to wire up what this page does in this video, because that's a little too much for this video. But what we're going to do is we're going to wire up our view model to at least have the properties and methods necessary to support this page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this page out into its own window. If you didn't know you could do that, that's a bonus. Of string. Let's bring that in. So binding list of string. There we go. And that's our full property. Now, if you notice back over here on our, we can pin this again, on our login view, we have the notify of property change on our sets. Let's go ahead and do that here as well. I'm just going to copy this just so that we have that already set up. So after we set the value, that's key there, we need to, after you have, actually, not for this one. Normal we do, but for a binding list, we don't need to change that because a binding list auto binds, and that's, it shouldn't be a problem. But, well, you know what? I'm going to put it there just in case because of the fact that if you overwrite the entire binding list, that would be a problem. But we're just going to add items to the list. First of all, this wouldn't get fire the set, and so it wouldn't fire the notify of property change. It's only if we overwrite the entire binding list that would be an issue. Okay, so that's one. The next one we have, let me scan through the list here. We have our text box called item quantity. So prop full item quantity. And again, we'll have our notify of property change. For our item quantity. And we can either move these together, the private backing fields, or we can just keep them where they're at. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you if you want to clean up one way versus the other. Okay, so after item quantity, what we're going to have is a couple of buttons. So the first button is going to be add to cart. And just like, again, you can come back to this model here and just make sure you're doing the same way every time. So we have the This was async. We don't need to do async for anything for this stuff, but we have the login and we have can login. We're gonna do the same thing over here. So we have a button called add to cart. We're gonna have a public void add to cart. And then we're going to have probably a property. I believe we did a property over here because it was easier to, nope, we did a property with a get because it was easier to trigger it elsewhere if the can log in was correct. So we triggered that off of this notify right there. And the login just did a check. So we're going to do kind of the same thing. So let's actually just copy and paste because, again, it's easier to do a copy and paste and then modify sometimes. So you have the same pattern. So the name is based upon the name of add to cart. And this is something that Caliburn Micro does for wiring things up. Now, this can add to cart can be a property that's a Boolean, or it can be a method that returns a Boolean. In this case, I want to do a property because properties can be notified of property change. So our get is going to do some kind of logic to determine if it should be set to true. Now, can add to cart, we have to make sure that something is selected, and we also have to make sure you have an item quantity. So we'll do both of those checks. When we set that up. But for right now, we're just kind of scaffolding in the basics here. We're not actually doing the work of wiring it all up. So we next have remove from cart. So make sure something selected is all we need to do. And then if it is, we can remove from cart. Okay, so that takes care of that button and, well, actually both buttons there. Now we have another list box. So again, you don't have to put these in the same sections, but I kind of gravitate towards putting them in similar sections. So, prop full, just easier that way. Binding list of strings. We don't have anything else yet. And it's going to be the cart, which is called cart. So that's simple. Okay, and we're going to have, again, that notify a property change. I wish it would just format that for me when I pasted it in, but it doesn't. So it's going to notify a property change on the cart. And now we have our 3 calculated values, which are also properties. So let's put them here. So prop full. And actually a calculated value, we don't need to have it stored with a private backing field. We just need a get. We're not going to set it, so we can just have a get. And the get, it should be a string. Let's do a string, even though it's a number. It's a calculated number, but the end result is just a string. So the first one is called subtotal. And for now, let's just return the 0 with a replace with calculation. And we'll do this twice more for total and for tax. So there are 3 values for subtotal, tax, and total. And then we have one more button to do. So let's copy our example and paste. And this is going to be the checkout method. Make sure there's something in the cart. So make sure something in the cart really is all there is to do for them to be able to check out. Okay, so there's all of our properties and methods that we're going to need to wire up to get our view to be enabled, to be working. Okay, so I can bring my sales view back in. So we have that. So now we have our sales view, which let's kind of scroll us out here a little bit and show you. That's our sales view. We have our sales page as a title. We have our items over here to the left. We have our cart on the right. If you want to select an item, you put a quantity in. We'll probably default that to like 1, and then you can change it if you want. You click add to cart. It's going to take that many of those items, put them in the cart. And once the cart gets updated, we'll have fire an event, essentially an event. It'll be a notify a property change, but it's going to calculate the subtotal, tax, and total based upon what's in the cart. And then this will light up saying, yes, you can check out now that something's in the cart. If they select something from the cart and hit remove from cart, it's going to go back over into items, or basically just get deleted from the cart because we're not changing inventory necessarily on the left. Okay, so that's our sales page. So when the user logs in, we're going to fire off an event, which we're going to learn how to do next week. We're going to wire that up, but we're going to fire off an event that the shell view was going to listen to. It's going to close down the login view and open up this sales view instead. And we're going to know who's logged in so that we know that they're authorized to do it. Okay, so if they're not authorized to do sales, we're going to throw an error and say, hey, you can't do this. Now, for right now, we're saying that everybody that has a login is authorized to complete sales. We'll get to separating those out later into things like what people are allowed to do and not allowed to do. Okay, so that's it for wiring or designing this and building it. Okay, we had the design from quite a few lessons ago when we first designed this section of work, and we just basically put it into WPF. Now, before we leave, one thing that I typically forget to do, but I want to do, we're going to go to changes here. I have the changes from what we just did, and I'm going to select all of them and stage them. So now these are all staged. If you're wondering, what did we change on something? So for example, what we change in the sales view model? Well, it was an ad. So they're all ads. The CS proj was changed. And in fact, there's what was changed. We added a view model and a view would depend upon the XAML for that view. So it actually adds a CS file, but it depends upon the XAML for it. And then down here is the XAML. That's a subtype called designer, generator, and all the rest. So if you're really interested, that's what changed. So whenever you have an ad, it's just everything's added. But whenever it's a change, so there's no paren or square brackets afterwards, you can see the before version on the left. That's called the head, which is the last time we had a commit. And then the current version, which is currently in staging, that has, and it shows the differences. So green means it's added, red means it was subtracted. Okay, so now that I have a stage, I can add a commit message and actually commit and push this. So add sales page, adds the sales page XAML and the supporting view model, just scaffolds out the VM does not add actual logic. Okay, so that's what this work did. I say commit staged, go to sync, and I can just say push because I know that there's no changes that have happened. But if I wanted to fetch just to make sure, I could do that. Sure enough, so now I hit push and our changes go up to GitHub. So all good. So that's the end of this lesson. We are going to do the eventing system next week, or at least in the next video. So we add that event manager system so we can pass those that data between listeners and also let people know when things happen. So we can have multiple listeners even saying, okay, you're logged in, then change this or do that. Okay, so that's next time. But until then, thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.